Good morning. I'd like to welcome you to my devotion time. Today I'm actually reading from the Old Testament in the book of Numbers. I'm sure you've spent a lot of time in the book of Numbers. But I'm reading from Numbers 13 to the beginning of Numbers 14. And I'm going to start with Numbers 13, the 25th verse. And this is the story where God sent, after 2 years of living in the wilderness, God's commanded Moses to send in representatives from each of the 12 tribes into the land of Canaan they're called spies, but to go and to discover what is there, what the opportunities to see what the Lord is planning for them. And because God is always trying to move us forward. God is always trying to bring God's blessing in important ways. And so I want you to hear when they come back with the report and what happens with that. So listen carefully. So starting with Numbers 13, verse 25. At the end of the 40 days, they returned from spying out the land, and they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the Israelites in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them, to all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told them, "We came to a land which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is the fruit. Yet the people who live in the land are strong, and the towns are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the land of the Negev, and the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites live in the hill country, and the Canaanites live by the sea along the Jordan." But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, "Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it." Then the men who had gone up with him said, "We are not able to go against this people, for they are stronger than we." So they brought to the Israelites an unfavorable report of the land that they had spied out, saying, "The land that we have gone through as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are of great size. And there we saw the Nephilim, the Anakites, come from the Nephilim, and to ourselves we seemed like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them." Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night. And all the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, "Would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become booty, and would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt?" So they said to one another, "Let us choose a captain and go back to Egypt." There's so much happening in this story, and the story continues. And I encourage you to go and read, go back to chapter 12 and read through 14 and hear this amazing story of faith and fear. What we hear is it's just been 2 years that they've been in the wilderness. Now, we've heard many times of how the Israelites wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. I joke, it wasn't because Moses didn't stop and ask directions. It is because God had intent on shaping God's people. But from the very beginning, God was ready to bring the people into the land after just the second year of being in the wilderness. But the people were afraid to receive God's promises. They were afraid that it was all going to be about them and their effort, and that the Spirit of God wouldn't be the one who would provide for them and lead the way and open the door for them. This is a severe case. And so what did they want to do? They wanted to go back to Egypt, where they were dying in slavery. But somehow that image, that familiarity with that circumstance felt better than going into an uncertain future. How often is that the case for us? How often is it that we hang on to the status quo, or we want to go back to what was before because we're afraid or we are concerned that what if the future isn't good enough? What if God isn't going to provide for us in the right kind of a way? And that is an issue of faithfulness. It's an issue of trust. If God is sending, and we hear initially the report, this is a wonderful place. It's a place flowing with milk and honey, all the goodness of life. You know, we're hearing that there's real promise here, but there are obstacles in the way. Well, what are the obstacles in your life? What are the challenges that you face? A friend of mine celebrated becoming a teacher the other day. Not just becoming a teacher, but becoming a lifetime teacher where he doesn't have to reauthorize in order to be able to do this. And so it's a milestone, an important one for teaching in the state of Wisconsin. And I rejoice with him, but I remember there was a time when he was afraid to move forward because he had these obstacles in his way, and they were financial in nature. And finally, things broke down in such a way that he had to grasp for that which was promised, that which he had dreamed of, and he succeeded. And that's what happens with God's faith in God, that God is preparing the way. But too often, we're afraid to take that next step. We're afraid to move out of our circumstance in order to receive that which is what God has intended all along. So this morning, I encourage you to kind of think about what does it mean for you to follow God in faith and to look ahead and to see where God is preparing the way. And what does it mean to take that next step? Because God didn't call us to just have a personal piety with God, to have a personal relationship where we have a relationship with God that, where we can pray about our fears, but basically we just stay where we are. God has called us in this baptismal promise to live this life of faithfulness in an important way. To live this life of faithfulness as a way of furthering God's kingdom and being a part of it. Some folks today are out protesting peacefully because they see that they need to stand up for what is genuine and right. And that can be a wonderful way of demonstrating that we are God's people and that we are seeking change for the sake of others. But that's not the only way. There are people to be fed. So the food pantries are an important way of reaching out. There are ways in which we demonstrate our faithfulness in kindness and care and forgiveness and compassion and working to let our lives be a reflection of God so that every person that we meet gets to experience a little bit of who God is through our kindness and care and welcome and belonging. And so what does it mean for us to welcome someone into a group? You know, instead of making them just feel on the outside, bring them in, get to know them, help them to feel like they too are important. There are lots of, this can happen at church. It can be part of another social network. It can be, neighborhood friends, someone new into the neighborhood. There are all kinds of things where someone is going through a change in their life. And they're afraid and they're concerned. And God's people are to surround them with love and help them to make this next step in faith. And when that time is ours, that there are things changing for us, we trust that God is going to lead us and that God will surround us with love, with people who will care for us. I've told the story a number of times that when I first came to St. John's, when I was leaving my former congregation, my daughter asked me, she said, where will we go? Who will our friends be? How do you know it's going to be all right? And I said, I don't. But I have faith that God is already preparing the way and that God already knows where we will be. And God is leading and preparing the place and preparing those who will receive us and love us and care for us, and we will love and care for them. 6 months after we came to St. John's, she said to me, "You're right, Dad. God was looking out for us, and he showed us the way." Wow. If a sixth grader can learn that lesson, maybe we all can. Give thanks to God for God's blessings. Amen.